Hello, and welcome to all of you joining us online for this inaugural unveiling of Politico Europe's Tech 28 Power List. I'm Laurens Cyrillus, Senior Policy Reporter at Politico, covering technology from the EU's capital, Brussels. In past months, Politico's team of reporters and editors got together in multiple rounds of discussion to find the people that are shaping Europe's approach to technology most. We debated names, we called up sources, and we boiled it down to a list of 28 power players from across Europe. In the next 45 minutes, we'll take a look at that list and how these nominees influence the way technology is perceived, shaped, and controlled in Europe. We will also hear from Helle Thorning-Schmidt, Denmark's former Prime Minister, who now co-chairs Facebook's Oversight Board. She's with us today for an interview. I want to remind you, you can tweet about this event using the hashtag PoliticoTech28. You can also send in questions for Helle and engage in a poll on our event page on politico.eu. Now, let's turn our attention to our 28 picks. 2019 was the year of the techlash, when the world debated the dangers of big tech. But the global pandemic that hit us in 2020 morphed that discussion into a much bigger conversation about technology's role in society. We all grew reliant on internet connections and video calls as we were forced into our homes to fight the virus. E-commerce companies boomed, bringing consumers nearly anything right at their doorstep, because they often could not buy it elsewhere. And cyber criminals and hacking groups turned the pandemic into a minefield for healthcare workers and vaccine developers, all the way to everyday users. In short, tech was everywhere. Our ranking of the power players in Europe reflects this expanded role that technology is taking up in society. But let me be clear, this is not a list of the hottest startup founders, though some of those are in the list. It's also not a ranking of big tech regulators or those that have the most raw power. There is no Margrethe Vestager, there is no Mark Zuckerberg on our list. You can find those in the news every day. Instead, Politico's ranking puts a spotlight on the people who have the most influence within their respective fields, often from behind the scenes. Some you may know, others you may have never heard of. To give you an example, Yassine Aslam and James Farrar are the pair behind a major lawsuit against Uber in London that resulted in drivers being granted minimum pay and various other benefits. Or take Corey Kreider. She's the co-founder of Foxglove, a tech advocacy group that has taken the lead on some of the biggest privacy cases in the UK. Frenchman Pierre Louet is the chairman and CEO of Les Echos Le Parisien Media Group, leading negotiations with Facebook and Google over licensing fees to make big tech platforms pay for news. Tech 28 is not a popularity ranking. It's not an honor roll for heroes either. Our choices do not reflect any moral judgment about how these people use their influence to shape the tech landscape. Case in point, Dmitry Badin, a shadowy Russian hacker, made our list. He's suspected of being behind the 2016 hack of the US Democratic National Committee that helped flip the presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. He was also behind a major hack of Germany's parliament, the Bundestag, in 2015. Those are just a few names. You can already read about 24 of our 28 picks on politico.eu. I invite you to go check it out. We broke down our list of 28 into 3 categories. There's rule makers, rule breakers, and visionaries. We invite you to consider these categories as broadly as we did. Rule makers are shaping Europe's way of dealing with technology. Rule breakers are shaking up the status quo. And visionaries are inventing entirely new ways to think about tech's role in society. Of each category, we selected one pick who stood out among their peers. A visionary, a rule breaker, and a rule maker with particular impact on technology in Europe. Next, I'd like to show you who came out on top in their respective categories. In the category of visionaries, we have activists, we have lawyers, but our number one pick is Patrick and John Collison, the co-founders of the Irish fintech firm Stripe. The Collison brothers have an edge over other EU startup bosses. They fit the mold of the young, brash and charismatic tech executive that we know so well from Silicon Valley. But when Europe is agonizing over how to develop its own unicorns, the Collison brothers are also in a prime position to influence European policy on boosting its startups. Patrick Collison recently advocated for a more streamlined common market, with more flexible stock options and visa schemes, ways of helping and supporting startups in Europe. If you're a European policymaker, you better be listening to what the brothers are saying. Next, we'll turn to our rule breakers. Among those challenging the status quo are lawyers, lobbyists, business leaders that think outside of the box. But our top pick goes to someone in elected office. Our top pick for rule breaker is Yolanda Díaz, Labour Minister in the Spanish government. European gig workers have a powerful ally in Díaz. Her groundbreaking Spanish writers' law gives trade unions their own gold standard to point to when they're demanding gig workers' rights. EU law to strengthen these rights is in the works, and Díaz is providing the gunpowder to pro-union activists who want to see further, stronger social protections in this field. Last but not least, we have our rule makers. The European Union likes to think of itself as the world's policeman for the tech sector. But behind Brussels regulations are lobbyists, activists and power brokers that determine how the sausage is made. Our topic for rulemaker is Helle Thorning-Schmidt, former Danish Prime Minister who co-chairs Facebook's oversight board. Thorning-Schmidt has the impossible job of deciding what people can post on the world's largest social network and what they can't. My colleague Mark Scott, Chief Technology Correspondent at Politico, is joining us from London to talk to Helle Thorning-Schmidt next. But before we switch to Mark, I want to hear from you. We've got an overall number one pick that we will reveal after the interview. And my question to you is, who would you pick to be at the top of our Politico 28 list? You can let us know in the next half hour on the application Slido on our events page on politico.eu. You can also go to slido.com and use the hashtag PoliticoTech28 to submit your favorite person. We will have a look at your suggestions right after the interview. You can also submit questions to Thorning-Schmidt using the Slido app on our events page. And don't forget to tweet using the hashtag PoliticoTech28. Now let's bring in Mark to help us with the interview with Helle Thorning-Schmidt. Mark, it's good to see you.
Hey, Lawrence, I feel like Eurovision. This is London calling. How are you?
Exactly. Brussels is taking your points, Mark. So you'll talk to our number one rule maker in a second. My question is, why Helle Thorning-Schmidt? Why did we pick her as number one rule maker for our list?
It's a pretty good question, right? Because this is all about who's setting the agenda and setting the rules for how we all use tech. I think we went for Helle purely because, as you mentioned in your introduction, the Oversight Board has become the quasi-Supreme Court for Facebook, the world's largest social media company. So like it or not, a lot of our conversation now is done online, be it about politics, be it about cat videos, and a lot of that stuff is now being done through Facebook and its platforms. And Helle Thorning-Schmidt and her 19 colleagues on the Oversight Board, as you say, have the final say on what can and cannot be said, posted, shared on the platform. The most notable decision they've made recently is around Donald Trump's ability to rejoin Facebook after his account was removed or postponed after the January 6th Capitol Hill riots. This is not by means a perfect situation. The Oversight Board is funded by Facebook, so critics have questioned its overall independence. There are also other questions around its ability to really affect change, purely because its decisions about individual posts only apply to those posts. They do not apply to more broader conversations around content moderation on Facebook. But like it or not, the Oversight Board and Helle Thorning-Schmidt, by default, frankly, as the co-chair, they are playing a massive role on what is and what is not allowed to be seen on the world's largest social media company. And therefore, it's very difficult to not see her as the rule maker that we should be talking to. And
fantastic. So let's hear from Helle.
Wonderful. Hello, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully that's the right introduction to get going. I want to jump right into questions.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for selecting me. I'm really pleased with that. I think it's recognizing the work of the Oversight Board. We'll discuss everything in a minute, but I also want to say that I think it's so great to see that so many people are engaging in how to actually understand this new connectivity we have an online have a safe community online, and engaging from various angles in this work. So also great to see the 27 finalists on this list. Great people and great engagement.
Most definitely. I suppose my first question comes to the core of the Oversight Board's mission. In the first, say, 6 to 9 months of your work, you've taken some pretty notable decisions. The most high profile is against Donald Trump. You've also made a decision against Narendra Modi out of India. And this goes to the core of what can and cannot be posted online. And you yourself have said specifically that there should not be a set of specific rules for politicians. There should be rules for everyone, not just for the few. But democracy is based on people being able to hear and communicate with their elected officials. Some of this is now being done through Facebook. So how do you balance the need for people in a democracy to be able to talk to and communicate with their politicians with decisions that you may or may not be taking in the future and have in the past in terms of limiting the ability of politicians to communicate with the electorate?
It's a really good question, and let me declare myself where I'm coming from in this whole discussion. This is an enormous discussion, and I don't think anyone has found the answer completely yet. As you said, the Oversight Board is actually the first attempt to moderate content online, away from a small elite in Silicon Valley, away from the commercial interest of that small elite, away, for example, from the commercial interest of Facebook. And for the first time, we actually have a way of moderating content, which is such a difficult thing to do. And I just want to say that content can be moderated in many different ways. You can have a completely free way of posting on social media where anyone can just post what they want. I don't think anyone wants that, because that means that free expression can turn into hate speech and harming other people. The other end of the spectrum is, of course, an extremely curated platforms where you only allow the nice content or perhaps the content that the sitting government is pleased about. That's, for example, what you have in many Chinese social media platforms where you have extremely moderated content and very curated content. So these are the two extremes. And what we're trying to find, of course, I think many of us who are engaging in this conversation, is that middle road. How do you moderate content? And how do you find that balance between human rights and free speech, which is a human rights, but also other human rights, because obviously free speech is not an absolute human right. It has to be balanced with other human rights. And that is what the oversight is there to do. Until now, we have seen content moderation, as I said, from a select few in Silicon Valley, and ultimately Mark Zuckerberg, who's been moderating content. Now we have the Oversight Board, which is a completely new invention to do this work. And of course, I want to say that I think this is a very, very positive new way of doing it. Then to your question about politicians. Obviously, we all want to hear from our politicians, and politicians are using social media more and more. All politicians use social media to reach an audience, and many are also going past the old media platforms to reach an audience in their own voice, feeling that this is a very big contribution to democracy, of course, that politicians can speak directly to their audience. So we demand of social media that we can hear from politicians. But what the Trump case is saying is that we can't create an exceptionalism for politicians, and we can't give special rights to politicians. So our verdict or our decision in the Trump case is actually saying that yes, politicians have a huge right to have a free voice in social media, but they don't have an absolute right. And if what they're saying is putting other people in danger, like what Trump's post was doing, then Facebook also has a right to moderate all that content from that particular person. Many people have really been happy about this this post, that this post got removed, because they say, yes, it was long overdue and Trump should have been removed long time ago. But I want to just remind everyone that we didn't remove Trump on the basis, or we didn't look at the Trump tweets, the Trump post is not tweets because it's on Facebook and Instagram, post further on. We only looked at the January 6th post, and it was on that basis that we agreed with Facebook that they were right to remove those posts.
I promised myself I wouldn't focus too much on Trump, but it feels like, you know, we're here, so let's get into it. One of the criticisms of the Trump decision that you made was that you punted it back to Facebook to make the final decision. And many who would advocate for a greater and more robust oversight board in terms of, you know, limiting or at least policing Facebook more, had wanted you to maybe take that decision yourself versus referring it back to Facebook. Can you just walk us through why didn't the oversight board make the courageous decision to do it themselves? Why did you ask Facebook to make that?
No, we did. That's not our role. Our role is to look at what Facebook is doing. Facebook referred this case to us because they were not sure they had taken the right decision, both in terms of removing Trump from the platforms, but also in terms of the sanction that they have decided for Trump. And that's why they actually referred this to the oversight board. That's exactly why we were created in the first place, to take those really hard content decisions. So we did take a decision on this. We agreed with Facebook that they had taken the right decision to remove Trump from the platform on the 6th of January, based on the fact that he was inciting violence, which is not which you can't do on the platform. So that is why we agreed with Facebook that they took the right decision. What we didn't agree with Facebook is that they can't just make up sanctions. They have to treat this user, this particular user, albeit a special user, as everyone else. So we told Facebook that they couldn't invent sanctions as they were going along, but had to find a sanction that was within their own sanction policies, and that's what they did after that. We've also asked Facebook whether they gave a longer leash or gave more time on the platform to Mr. Trump, based on the fact that he is a politician. But they actually said to us that they didn't use the newsworthiness criteria, and what came out of this decision was that they don't want to put politicians in a special category. They want to treat all users alike, which I personally think is a very good idea.
Okay, those are the Trump questions. Let's move on to bigger and better things. I've been covering online content moderation for, frankly, longer than I would like to remember, and it's interesting to see how the topic has become so topical and sexy in recent months. And you look at some of the actual legislation coming through the pipe, both in, say, Brussels, Berlin, even potentially in Washington, D.C. And many of them, these legislative proposals are trying to do similar things to what you guys are doing in terms of policing, moderating content. You know, how do you see the Oversight Board as a sort of private entity working with sort of public bodies and public legislation? Because there is some overlap, but there will inevitably be some tension there.
I'm not sure there will be. Yeah, there could be tension, but there don't have to be tension. We are not here. The oversight not here to replace regulation, and we're not here to solve everything Facebook. There'll be other issues surrounding Facebook which the oversight board cannot solve. But I still have a question for all those people who say, "Oh, just leave it to the legislators. Let's leave it to regulation." How is this going to work? Can you moderate content in a courtroom? I'm not so sure you can do that. Just looking at the cases that we have already looked at, for example, a breast cancer post from Brazil or a COVID post in France. I really urge everyone listening to go and look at our decisions. I don't think you can moderate content in a courtroom. And that means whatever you do, you will have to use some form of self-regulation when you moderate content. That content can either be moderated purely by the companies themselves, or they can have independent bodies to help with that self-regulation. And self-regulation is not a foreign thing in many countries. In many countries, you have a press self-regulation where the press has set up a body that actually makes that self-regulation. So I actually believe that legislation in terms of content moderation is extremely difficult, because you have to balance different human rights against each other. You also don't want national legislation to be too heavy on social media, because that would basically mean that we have a Facebook for every country, which will destroy our connectivity. So I think these are really difficult questions. So I always get a little bit surprised when I hear legislators talking about content moderation as an easy thing or something that you can just make legislation for. I listen to the debate in the UK right now, and it's just not very easy, these questions. So I just want people to look at the Oversight Board. We're the only show in town right now. There's a lot of talk about how to moderate content, but basically the Oversight Board is the only show in town where we have shown that there is actually a different way of moderating content, which does not lie with the social media companies themselves.
But as a Democrat with a small d yourself, I have a lot of sympathy for that. But do you not think that these issues are so pertinent to how democracy works, we should put it into the hands of elected officials versus even an independent body like yourselves?
Yes, some of the issues should be in the hands of elected politicians. I mean, I was a politician myself, and I believe very much in politics also to regulate anything that comes from the market economy. That's where I come from politically. But I also want to just ask the question, what if it was legislators only regulating what could be on social media in Russia, in Turkey, in Belarus, in Hong Kong? How would that work? I'm pretty confident in India, for example. I feel pretty certain that that would actually stifle free speech for the opposition groups, for women groups. And there are so many incidents here where we say if legislators get too heavy-handed on social media, we will end up with a situation where we have less democracy, less free speech. And I never thought that that was where our newfound connectivity should lead us. So I'm also urging European legislators and policymakers to think about this, to think that Europe and the social media world is about connectivity, is about giving voice to millions and millions of people who would not otherwise have had the voice. And it can't be just something we don't talk about. If new legislation in Europe or in the UK or in the US actually means that people in other parts of the world where they don't have as much democracy will be stifled or have less of a voice. Let's not forget that half of the global population live in countries that are not democracies, and we can't just leave them behind because legislators are so keen to legislate in our part of the world. That's something I would like to warn about from a democratic point of view.
Many of those countries, those authoritarian countries, are already passing their own domestic laws. Do you think there'll be an instance in the future where the Oversight Board will go against a particular decision that has been sort of tried to be imposed on Facebook by one of these domestic laws from an authoritarian country?
Well, I don't know enough about it, but I do think that Facebook is under enormous pressure in not democratic regimes to moderate more content and to push out content from opposition leaders and opposition as such. And I think some of the cases that we have looked at suggest that there is that pressure we had a case from Russia, for example, where a person, I don't want to go deep into it, everyone can look it on our website, where it looks a little bit like Facebook is under pressure. And that is what we want to shed a light on. Is Facebook coming under pressure in some countries? And I don't know, you have to ask Facebook, but it looks like Facebook is struggling to actually operate in many countries because the government are pushing back really, really hard on Facebook to moderate content. Look at what the Turkish government is saying about how they want to influence content on Twitter. I don't know if they said the same about Facebook, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had. So just let us make sure that we understand that when legislators talk about how much they want to decide on content in Europe and in the UK, they could also give a very effective, by doing that, they could give a very effective tool for harder governments in not so democratic countries to really push back on Facebook. And what we don't want is a Facebook for every country, where it is the government basically deciding what goes on social media. I would warn so strongly against that. That is not a free social media platform, and that will really push back opposition in many, many countries, even in Europe.
This might sound like I'm defending authoritarian governments, which I'm not, but it feels like a lot of the decisions you're making are very culturally specific. You know, things that affect Brazil are very different than, say, affect Turkey. How can you create a one-size-fits-all approach to moderating content on Facebook when everything you do is very, very culturally specific? And there's no way really to create a sort of global free speech norm because of the specificities of each country.
I don't know where that comes from, Mark. I don't know what you base that on. I don't see our decision as culture specific at all. I think we would take the same decisions wherever they happened in the world. If you look at our breast cancer case in Brazil, it would be the same decision wherever that happened. If you look at our COVID information case from France, it would be the same everywhere. So I'm not sure I understand where that idea that it's cultural specific, and the idea that it is not. The idea is that we use our universal human rights and they apply everywhere. So we are trying not to take cultural specific decisions, and I don't think we have taken cultural specific decisions until now, because the whole idea is that there should be one Facebook, one Instagram, one set of human rights that belongs to everyone in this world, and it applies to everyone. And that's why it's so difficult to introduce national legislation into this, because Facebook and Instagram should be guided by human rights. And that is what we are trying to do in all our decisions.
But are you not in a difficult position in which if there is a universality of human rights, but individual countries, both in Europe and the US and elsewhere, are passing domestic legislation to look after their domestic citizens? And you're going to run up into the fact that you guys potentially are trying to create a global legislative norm or judicial norm around specific practices on Facebook, but that's going to run headlong into domestic efforts or even European efforts with the Digital Services Act that is going to go against some sort of universal truth.
I mean, there is no universal truth, and I know you know that as well. But in my ideal world, something like the Oversight Board should have been created by our multilateral organizations, such as the UN. How great would it not be if the UN had created an independent oversight board that could look into this, what content is allowed on social media platforms everywhere, and balance human rights up against each other, basically balancing free speech with other human rights. This is really difficult. It's very easy to say, but it's very, very difficult. So that would be the best scenario. This has not happened, and that is why I'm defending the Oversight Board. Of course, if I shouldn't, who would? I'm defending the Oversight because I have not seen any other proposals, not in Europe, not in the US, not in the UK, on how to make to moderate online content. And what we also trying to achieve is that we want much more transparency around how you moderate content online. And for the first time, you can actually see how Facebook takes their decision, why they take these decisions, how they have balanced these different parts of the human rights in their decisions. And you can see how we have taken the decision. I think it must count for something that for the first time, you have content moderation outside the big companies. We are actually not funded directly by Facebook. We are funded via trust, and they can't touch that trust. They can't get rid of me if I say something that they don't like, or any of the other board members. So for the first time in history, you have content moderation outside these social media platforms, and surely that must be a good thing. I'm not saying that this is the last thing we need to say about this, that we can't invent these things. But as I said before, we are the only thing that is actually up and running. And I defy anyone, lawmaker or anyone, to come up with a better way. And I've discussed this with so many people. I've still not heard it. I don't think legislators can do content moderation. Of course, they can set the boundaries for what is legal and what's not legal. But the actual content moderation, they cannot do. And that will mean they just have to push it back to the social media platforms. And is it not better then that you have a self-regulatory component in the middle? And that is what the oversight actually is. I hope that answered your question. But I do think it is worth thinking about that if we had in the best of all worlds, we would have UN doing that. That we can't have. And this is perhaps the second best way of moderating content online.
I would say that if the UN got involved, so would the Chinese and Russians. So which is probably maybe why we don't want to go down that route. I should also say that although it's a trust, that the money from that trust comes from Facebook. Yes, so there is Facebook money there in terms of how you are funded. I just want to.
It's not like that. There's only Facebook money there. I mean, Facebook is paying the whole show via the trust fund. But it's not like they can touch that trust fund. They can't touch the money they have put in the trust fund, and they can't get rid of any of us. I have no interest in Facebook. In their business model or however they make their money, and at least that must be. I'm not saying it's ideal. I'm just saying it's better than Facebook making these content moderation decisions themselves, and it's also better than. Politicians making these content moderation decisions. I think they would be extremely badly placed to take these day-to-day content moderation decisions.
You in the past, you've been public in saying that maybe the oversight board could make decisions for other social media platforms going forward. You look at how either say YouTube and Twitter have different terms of service, approach these issues in somewhat different ways to Facebook. Yourselves are only 20 members plus the additional staff. Like, how would that even work in terms of bringing on decisions from other platforms?
Yeah, I think what we are seeing these days that, for example, what's happening on Twitter, it's extremely difficult to work out on which principles Twitter makes their content moderation decisions. And the more we work in the oversight board, the clearer it will be how Facebook actually take their decision, because we will be holding them to account. We will, of course, do a yearly transparency report. You can see all our decisions. We're inviting people to take part in our decisions by inviting stakeholders to send public comments. And for the first time, you actually can have a real debate about how you moderate content, and you can agree or you can disagree. So our oversight board is set up to be open to other social media platforms to be part of this. Then, of course, you would have to tweak it so it would be possible for other social media platforms to join us. But it is actually something that could happen down the line. It's not something that we are working actively to make happen right now. We have far too much to do in trying to get this going, and we have not even issued our first yearly report of how it is going and how Facebook is responding to our recommendations, and to how they're responding to us looking over their shoulders, which we are definitely doing. So this is not something in the immediate future, but it's something that could happen in the long run.
When you are looking to take on new cases, Can you give us a sense of what you're looking for? Because there's only 20 of you. You know, you have made interesting choices in terms of, say, Black Pete in the Netherlands, breast cancer, COVID, obviously Trump and Modi come to mind. But as you look forward, without looking to prejudice any future cases, what is the message you're trying to send both to Facebook and to the users in terms of what type of cases you'll be taking on?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to take most difficult cases, for example, the Trump case or the Zwarte Piet case, which was a really difficult case because Zwarte Piet, I mean, I know enough about the Netherlands to know that Zwarte Piet is a very, very ingrained tradition. It's something that people enjoy, have fun with, and is not meant in a racist way whatsoever. So it's actually a really difficult decision because it also goes straight into a cultural a way of life. In the Netherlands, so a difficult decision. So we are choosing the most difficult decisions. Then we're also trying to get through all the community standards, hate speech, nudity, and all those difficult community standards. We also want to have cases from around the globe. So we want to cover the whole world in our cases, and which is of course difficult as well. But what we are seeing a lot is where hate speech begins. And where free speech becomes hate speech. I think that is really, really difficult to select when that happens. And also there's always this question about how much can you insult someone online and then call it hate speech or inciting violence or whatever. I think we all agree that we have to tolerate a certain amount of insult online. And also in the general media, you have to tolerate some form of insult. Look at Charlie Hebdo, look at the Muhammad drawings. There is a place for insults online. It can sound weird when you say it, but that is actually the case. But when does that turn into hate speech and something that can endanger others? So these are very, very difficult content moderation decisions that we then try to pick and send to our panels. We are also looking into cases that can translate into other cases. Of course, this is not interested if we just do it on a case-by-case basis. We also want Facebook to look at the principles around these cases and use those principles in other cases that are similar to the cases we decide, which will ultimately also mean that they will have to look at how they moderate content in their automated or algorithmic way when they moderate content, because it has to spill over into how they moderate content when they do the automated content moderation. So we're picking the most difficult cases. That's my short answer.
I've been remiss to say thank you so much for the online questions that are flooding in. And with the time we have left, I just want to pick up one that comes up quite a lot. Are we not overcomplicating this? Is it not just simply to say, when it comes to content moderation, what's illegal offline should be illegal online and call it quits?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The problem is that it's very, very hard in the moment to decide what is illegal when you have a piece of content, and also you want content to be removed really quickly if it's something that is actually harming others. There's a lot of examples in hate speech. Just this week, there's been a lot of examples in terms of hate speech on some of the regarding some of the England players from the Euro 2020, and you can't wait to get this through a courtroom, and that's why you have to have a mechanism that can help the social media platforms get principles of how when they should remove stuff online. They can do that themselves and they have to do it, but they can't always, there will be examples where it's really, really difficult. And that's why I'm arguing that in this space, social media space, perhaps it's good to have a self-regulatory platform as you have in media elsewhere. I know that you have that in many European countries. You have that in my own country, Denmark. You have self-regulation. I think that you have that in the UK as well. So it's not something completely new that we have legislation, which is, of course, above everything else. Then you have the one that actually is responsible for the content. In this case, it's Facebook. And then you have a self-regulatory mechanism in the middle to try to help take these kind of decisions. So of course, legislation is above everything, and but you also then have to add in the factor that we don't want 100 different Facebooks or 89 different Facebooks, which are the number of countries that Facebook is operating, because that will mean that we have less connectivity, and that will also mean that opposition groups in many, many, many countries will be pushed back and have less of a voice, a free speech, and less of a voice, less agency than what they have now. So you also have to add that legislation is not, you can't only use legislation in one country, you have to look at the global community, where human rights law is actually a very good place to start. This was a very long answer, but it's also to underline that anyone who says that this is easy, that there are easy answers, I don't think so. The problem with this is that it's quite complex, and you have to also be open to finding new solutions to new problems.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. And so I just want to say, Helle, thank you so much for joining us on our inaugural Tech 28. It's been a pleasure to chat. I wish we could talk longer. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Brussels, London calling. Lawrence, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Seems like the discussion never ends, but that's the nature of this discussion, I believe. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Helle. Just a reminder that you are watching Politico's unveiling of the Tech 28 Power Ranking. We've listed the people who shape technology in Europe. And we're getting to the end of our event, but there's one key thing missing. Every ranking needs a person at the top. And so far, we've revealed 27 names of our list of power players. All that's left is to reveal who our number one pick is. We asked you a little while ago to submit your favorite picks, and let's see who you came up with. So there's some interesting, we see a big Margrethe Vestager right in the middle, spelled in two different ways, so that sort of expands her cloud a little bit more, I guess. Other interesting names. There's some we expected. Mark Zuckerberg and Margrethe Vestager. I think I mentioned it wouldn't be them because of the sheer power and the prominence they have. We decided to take a different route. But we've got some other interesting names there as well. James Farrar is actually on our list. He's not at the top, but he's there, as well as Bojana Bellamy. She's also on our list. So far, no winner if I'm looking at your suggestions. So I guess that brings us to the moment where we reveal who we picked. In terms of leading the list of Politico's Tech 28 for 2021, our winner is Daniel Ek, co-founder and CEO of music streaming service Spotify. Why Ek? Well, Daniel Ek has for years mostly stayed out of the spotlight when it came to the discussion around regulating the tech sector. But starting last year, Ek has been increasingly using his voice and his clout to weigh in on debates in Europe. Debates like governing Apple's App Store policy or boosting Europe's startups. Ek is a Swede who stands shoulder to shoulder with US tech moguls. And in that sense, he stands out in Europe. The question is how he is using that position of power to further Europe's footprint in the tech sector. Ek was a key player in the alliance of app developers called the Coalition for App Fairness, which challenged Apple and Google over how they control the global app industry. He's also the main complainant in an ongoing EU probe into Apple's App Store model and whether it is fair to app developers like Spotify. Ek is also using his money to support fledgling European startups that could become tomorrow's tech champions. His investment strategy matches the EU's own priorities, including pouring funding into deep tech startups that develop advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and blockchain. And he's funding companies that fight climate change. This spring, he founded the venture capital fund Prima Materia, which brands itself as a European investment company. So at a time when Europe's startups are increasingly attracting funding and the EU is looking to create the companies that will lead the tech sector in 5 or 10 years' time, you better keep an eye on where Ek is putting his money. What's Ek's superpower? It's that he is shaping the continent's tech policy on 2 fronts. One is that he is challenging the dominance of today's tech giants. And 2 is that he is fostering the EU's own champions in the making. Let me just quickly bring in Mark, our chief tech correspondent, to share his thoughts on the topic. So Mark, Daniel Ek, why did we go for him?
Because he's a Nordic person, and we only like Nordic people in the list. No, I'm joking. I think Ek is a combination of both being a very successful entrepreneur and showing the next generation of EU tech founders that they can do it and they can compete globally with the US and now progressively Chinese players. I think he's also been pretty smart in terms of how he approaches the regulatory questions. His role in some of the antitrust fights against Apple have been sort of at the forefront and have been picked up by other companies globally. So I think he's been very savvy. I won't even mention his potential acquisition of the Arsenal football team in terms of his breadth of interests. But I think it's key to say that, you know, when it comes to combining entrepreneurial success and regulatory nous, he's pretty much the only one who should top the list this year.
Yeah, and on choosing Arsenal, I guess you have proponents and critics for that, but that's a discussion we won't go into today. Is he your best shot at sort of participating in the global debate from the business perspective? If you look at his stature within the tech community itself, what can we say about that?
I think when you come at this debate, it's always useful to be a multi-billion-dollar company and competing with Apple and Google successfully. That gives you the credibility that, with all respect to the other successful European tech entrepreneurs, there are very few that can match that. And now him doubling down both with his own venture capital fund and also sort of the halo effect that Spotify has had on sort of the people who've left Spotify to do their own business. I think it's a double whammy in terms of his ability to sort of jumpstart entrepreneurial success, not only just in the Scandinavian countries, but elsewhere, but also his ability to read the room on regulation. And again, we should say that, you know, his case against Apple is still ongoing and we don't know what's going to happen, but his ability to shape that in a way that benefits his company and is also now benefiting others is something we should be watching.
That's the thing to watch out for in the year to come. Thanks a lot, Mark. That's it from us for now, for our inaugural Tech 28 Power Ranking. I hope you enjoyed it. I did. You can read about all our nominees online on politico.eu, where you can find the full profiles and you can read about their superpowers and what it is that we are watching out for in the coming year, linked to all of these different people. If you have feedback about our event, you can email live@politico.eu. And you can also check out our upcoming events at politico.eu/events. Most of all, I would like to thank you for tuning in. We'll be back with more technology coverage and events soon. Until then, have a great evening from all of us here at Politico. Bye for now.